Hey guys, Alex here from AirOps, and I'm really excited to be joined by Marcel from Deepgram today to talk a little bit about his experience using AirOps. Maybe just for the audience, Marcel, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Deepgram?
Yeah, sure. Marcel Santilli, I'm CMO here at Deepgram. A little bit about me. I actually started a career at large enterprises like IBM and HP, and then found myself into the startup world with a company called HashiCorp. Early days where it was open source and we scaled that to now a public company. So I was there a few years, and then I was at a few different SaaS companies like ServiceTitan, Upkeep, and then found my way into the AI world. Was at Skill AI for a couple of years and had the opportunity to put together some of the biggest AI conferences from a digital perspective. We did 3 conferences. We had, Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, and, Kevin Scott from Microsoft, like tons of awesome AI visionaries. And so I kind of had the backstage opportunity to just learn so much about AI from all different perspectives before AI exploded in the last year or so. And then I joined Deepgram about a year or so ago. And one of the things that really attracted me to Deepgram was this concept of voice as a modality in AI that felt like it was underhyped maybe, and how I like to think about it is, if you remember when Alexa and Google and all these assistants came out, right? All this hype and people were really excited and they got some value out of it. And then, I don't know if you experienced this, but I feel like my Google Assistant has not changed at all since. And it was kind of like, I like to call it the first wave of voice, and then people were just disappointed. But it's decent enough, it's there. People still use it to turn their lights on, or at least I do. But that's kind of about it. Or ask to see the camera in the baby's room, those types of things, And so what Deepgram is solving is really kind of this speech and voice AI. And if you think about it, from both the speech recognition as well as speech generation, and then understanding that, right? And part of what we believe in is you need this API layer that allows companies to build on top of, and you need models that are ultra fast and efficient, because real time, I think, is going to take over. Right now, a lot of things are done in batch, but I think the majority of the value that's going to come in the future, especially with voice and communication, is going to be in real time, which, on the LLM side, people just got used to really slow things, and now you're starting to see the trend of oh, we need faster, more tailored models, and this is something we've done since Deepgram was really started. And so it's a really exciting space to be in, because Deepgram kind of powers thousands of apps and companies out there, and it's really cool because I believe we process the most voice data of any speech-to-text provider. And we recently announced text-to-speech as well. And so that's a little bit about Deepgram. And I kind of miss the days of having being at a company with an AI that actually has a product that hundreds or thousands of people actually use and build things on top. And that's kind of my sweet spot.
Yeah, amazing. And what an amazing journey. And I think what's really interesting with models, be they language or speech, is that each time they get 10x cheaper or faster, a whole new host of use cases emerge. I'm just curious if you could share a couple of examples of maybe the things that the latest models are unlocking for people in the field.
The way I think about it is LLMs got better last year, so much so that it just unlocked a lot of different possibilities, and then the LLM stack is maturing more and more. And I think now there's a little bit more focus on reliability and scale and speed and things like that, because I think we're still in the transition phase from where demoware to true production, where it can't fail at all or almost at all. And I think the cool thing with voice is that when Deepgram first came out with, I believe it was one of the first end-to-end deep learning speech models. This is way before Whisper came out, and Whisper's done an amazing job of having a lot of language coverage and things like that. But that kind of started to unlock a lot of the legacy stuff that's still locked away, where people were kind of doing the old school rules-based speech recognition. But then the way I think Deepgram approached it enabled things to be so much faster and cheaper. And when I say cheaper, that means more efficient models, not just what some of the big cloud providers do, which is just throw free compute to people because they're okay running a loss at first. We're talking about highly efficient models, And so that started to kind of open up a lot more possibilities of people that were having to be very selective, right? So if you're on the speech recognition side, if you're doing transcription with a human or a very low accuracy model back in the day, you were having to be very selective. So maybe you were only transcribing or analyzing 1% of your data or your calls or things like that, right? Then that unlocked hey, now we can do 10, 50%. And then that unlocked all these awesome products. And a lot of them that have been built, many of them are our customers, were in the kind of call analytics, agent assist, where if I'm having a call and within a contact center environment, right, like there's like real-time things. It opened up a lot of batch things that people can do, whether it's like content creation, like podcasts, like all types of things. And then more recently, that also opened up all these meeting assistants that you see out there that follow people around in meetings. And I think it's getting people more comfortable to this idea of having something that listens in almost in all their conversations, or as many as they want within their work environment at least, right? But then you end up with like this junk essentially. Even if it's perfectly accurate transcription, it's like, what do I do with this? And I think people are still trying to figure out how to extract value from that. But I think what's being locked up right now in those, the LLM costs are prohibitive. And I do think like things like AirOps are going to help unlock quite a bit of it, because you're democratizing access to a lot of LLMs without needing like developers to go stand up a bunch of different APIs or host a bunch of models and then manage a pipeline of models that break all the time. And then you start adding utility aspects to it. So I think from that perspective, that starts to unlock people building their own custom flows, which I think ultimately is what people want. I think people want control over the prompts, they want control over the models, they want a ton of control over the inputs, and they want a ton of control over the outputs and where the data ends up in. And I think one single LLM provider won't do that. Anyways, that was a long answer saying now we're starting to get into where the bottleneck is the cost of models, and then once that's solved, I think the next step is going to be to this explosion of real-time applications, both in voice and everywhere else,
Yeah, it's going to be an amazing couple of years ahead of us. I think what we're seeing on our side is obviously we're benefiting from improved models, cheaper models, faster models, and there's so many emerging capabilities in these models that people are just discovering, particularly on the language side. But then the distance that needs to be traveled from that capability through to a real production system, as you mentioned, is sometimes much bigger than people think, because they get an initial output, they think that this is awesome, it's ready to go, but actually that path to it kind of being 3 months into production working really well is actually a much longer road. And so at the core of, I think certainly what we're seeing is that there needs to be a good degree of experimentation, a good degree of testing, and allowing people to do that in a way that doesn't require them to necessarily consume engineering cycles or copy paste prompts or learn Python. Really opens up the rest of the organization to bring their domain expertise, experiment and build with these models. And I think the final thing is just the use cases are still really emerging. To your point, is where are the real pockets of value in the organization that these models can unlock, and how are those going to start to see their way into our everyday workflow? So some really great work happening out there, and we're really excited by what we're seeing on our platform. As you know well, we're big fans of Deepgram. We have your models inside of our platform. People are building away a lot of content use cases. We have sales call transcription use cases. We have public statements made by different executives being analyzed in our workflows. So we're really surprised at how people are blending kind of LLMs with Deepgram transcription models to create really fantastic outputs all the time. And I'm sure the best is yet to come. So it's been great to partner with you. Would love to hear a little bit about your kind of discovery of AirOps and the problem you're trying to solve. Maybe tell us a bit about that journey. Would love to hear it.
AirOps is definitely my favorite tool that I've used more than I think most people in the last several months. The challenge I see, and what I think a lot of people don't realize, is how much getting the inputs right matter in the outputs. I'll give an example. Like if you want to create an article, one way to do it is just like go on ChatGPT and type a prompt and whatever, right? Like you get some crappy thing back, or that sounds half okay. Another way is like you can go and say, let me go and do a bunch of research and manually come up with a huge prompt that's crazy complex and shove it into ChatGPT and get something back, right? But what I started to find when you're trying to do things, especially in scale, is like the ability to just go ingest a bunch of data, go process that data a little bit, and then go do multi-step LLMs, and sometimes different LLMs or different types of models, and then having just a little bit of utility built into it, like whether it's ingesting data from like a database or just Airtable or something like that, or if it's within the AirOps flow, then like I saw this huge unlock where it's like, wow, like this is actually like really, really good. And it just started to unlock like a ton of different use cases for us because we had the data to go seed. And so without giving too much of our playbooks away, right, I got to be a little careful, but we're now averaging about 15,000 people a day, and it has doubled pretty much monthly now on a lot of content that we created through AirOps. It still requires us to do some work on our side for the inputs, but once we found the right recipe for the inputs, the core of the outputs are been driven by AirOps, and every day as you all are adding functionality, I'm actually putting more and more into the AirOps flow versus other tools out there. And so like that's just one example, but there's like so many other things you can do from like a go-to-market perspective, from a research perspective, where you find pockets where, you know, whether it's your SDR team, whether it's your marketing team, or almost any team within the company, almost guaranteed they're wasting some time or they're spending more time they should. And the way they're thinking, I think ChatGPT kind of got everyone to think one way. And that's okay, and that opened up a lot of possibilities. But people thought one-to-one interaction, and that's very time consuming. Not a lot of people are thinking, how do I batch process 1,000 or 10,000 things? And I think that's part of what was really exciting with my journey with AirOps. Okay, this actually works. And then the great thing was also the outputs. Well, I might just want to run something really quickly in this flow, or I might want to share that with a team member to use it, or I actually want to integrate it with something else and dump it somewhere else, or I actually just want to do some, like, use it as the backend to some application. So I think the fact that AirOps from the beginning did that was helpful. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't have been able to get as much value right away.
And you touched on some really interesting pieces there. First of all, great that you're seeing results. That's what we want to drive in the world. In terms of the workflow itself, you know, I think there are so many kind of co-pilot chat-based helpers out there. You know, obviously ChatGPT, Notion AI, really great tools, very helpful for kind of the ad hoc work. But I think in kind of go-to-market and marketing use cases, so often you want to be able to scale things with a high degree of precision. And so I think this sort of quadrant of scalable and precise marketing use cases that want to use LLMs, but in a kind of much more controlled, structured, procedural way, where you bring your own data, you bring your own inputs, and then you have humans looped into that. So it's really able to accelerate the creation of original, relevant, high-quality content. Is a really interesting model for kind of marketing in general. We've obviously now seen across a couple hundred companies the creation of content for websites and SEO and kind of marketing, and there's such a huge difference when people like yourself are really considerate about the inputs coming in, the structure, the audience, and you create something that's actually incredibly relevant and useful for the user, and then the results that drives versus, you know, going to ChatGPT or just doing naked LLM prompt and just putting the results online. And obviously Google ultimately cares about relevant, interesting information that's going to meet a user's query. And the AI piece is going to be a fact of life going forward. Yeah. And so really zeroing in on what matters and what's valued is going to be very important if we want to drive real results with this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was probably the piece that I was most shocked about, was when we kind of hit this inflection point around beginning of December, and then it's like every day it's been kind of growing like crazy. But it was the fact that I did this experiment over the weekend, actually. I took an app that actually had about 200,000 people that search for it every month. And I'm like, let me go use this flow. And I actually used a more detailed flow, and I did a little bit more manual work on the inputs for that one. And 2 days later, it was in the first page search result. So this is an app that is highly competitive, not insane, the most one, but it's still like high search volume. And then yesterday, I did another one where it was like, we had a prospect come through, and I was like, let me see if I can rank for this company's brand terms. And I created a page, and then today is in the number 7 search result when you search for that prospect's brand, essentially. And given this was like kind of overnight success, 6 months in the making, because we built like a huge experience. We did a ton of research. There was a lot of work, so it was not just like hacking one thing away one day and it works. But to me, I think that was the most shocking thing, because now in almost every search result, you're seeing Google saying either generate an AI result or it's embedded in the result already. And then you're like, well, how is this showing in the first page. And I think part of it, what people start to realize is if your inputs are unique enough, you're still going to have a better output than Google's AI has, or would be complementary to it at least. And so building unique flows that allow you to kind of ingest unique inputs or create unique inputs, I think is the biggest advantage for people trying to build, especially content with AI or use AI in general.
I totally agree. And when you think about the coming year and beyond and how marketing teams should think about incorporating AI into their strategy and the types of skills they should have on the team, has this changed your opinion on how to kind of structure teams for success in a world where these models are so capable, but obviously need orchestrating and structure around them?
So what I'm doing is you need somebody within your team that is really hands-on. In this case, it was me. Like I probably spent a good 200 hours myself just to get to something and building something, because it didn't exist before. There was no playbook to copy and paste and whatnot. But now that my team is seeing the results, everyone's kind of shocked. There's not that many instances in my career where I was able to 20x traffic in 2 months, like on a company that was already well established. That doesn't exist. You don't grow traffic from a few 100,000 a month to 1 million plus, right? Like very easily. So now a lot of what we've been doing, like almost everyone on the team is thinking through, how can I build my flows? How can this help me? And in a lot of ways, it might be from the 0 to 1 stage when you're trying to create something. It might be from the 1 to 80% done stage. It might be for collaboration stage at scale, or it might be where it does a huge chunk of the work. But I think it's starting to open up a lot more possibilities. So we actually went through this whole exercise, for example, with our SDR team and actually acquiring very custom data about potential prospects. We're like, hey, I want to know every single company that have these types of use cases listed on their website, because that's the product that they're building. And if they're building those types of products, or that's what they're offering, there's a very good chance that they're going to need to use our API. And so we came up with a list of 70,000 companies and websites that have that listed. And then we went and did all this other data acquisition around it. And now we kind of match that with, we have this awesome app we use called Koala, and it tells you triggers when people come to your website and do certain things that are high intent that predict revenue. And now we're starting to come up with like playbooks where using things like AirOps, where you're taking data that's unique, not just Clearbit, like way more unique, including some like custom field, custom classification things. You're taking like real-time signals. Then what you can do with that is the possibilities are huge with AirOps. It's not just like, hey, come up with an email here. There's all kinds of things you can do. You can create like a custom page for that account. You can create custom touches. You can do all types of things. But then you also have another input that's really interesting, which is, what did you do on the website? And so we have triggers like, if you read a certain doc on our doc site, that's one of the most predictive things. So then we can say, hey, this trigger is part of the input as well. And then go scrape the person's LinkedIn profile, go do this, go do that. And then you can build these custom flows. And then I think this next stage, now that we validated a lot of this, is like, okay, now how do we scale this? How do we enable everyone in the team without any technical skills to use this flow or plug into these flows,
Yep. And it really took that experimentation and initial sort of validation in order to get the confidence to then say, okay, there's real value here. This is working, albeit in a small way. Let's go scale it up. So yeah, that's so awesome to hear.
One thing that I think it might be a little bit relevant here, I think there's people that are going to find value from tools like Jasper or whatever. For me, one of the things that kind of holds me back, where I paid for Jasper at one point and ended up not using it that much, and I'm not trying to trash Jasper because I think there's people that they do a good job, and including not just Jasper, Copy AI, all of those tools. They provide awesome value for certain people, but they're not going to give you as much flexibility and control. And so what ends up happening is you're going to still invest 50 to 100 hours if you want the outputs from those tools to be good, because you got to write your brand positioning, your messaging, what your products do, and this and that. And then if you do all of that work and you fill in all the blanks, all the fields, and you go through all of that, then you get pretty decent outputs probably. But then you don't have control over the behind the scenes things. And so what happens if they ever go from using one model to another model and the outputs change completely? I'll give you an example. Recently I tried to play around with Claude 2.1 versus 2, and what I noticed was like the output improved in some ways, but then when it didn't know things, it was way more sensitive to just saying like, sorry, I don't know anything, I'm not going to say anything here. And I was like, oh shoot, like now I got to go either try to fix that, but I was like, okay, let me revert back this flow because it actually degraded the outputs for now. You don't have that level of control. So if you're relying on a service that doesn't give you that level of control, you can't change. If the output is not good, you're just not going to use it because you don't have any control over it.
Funny you should say that. We've had instances where we've encouraged users to switch to the new GPT-4 Turbo model, and they were using GPT-4 32K before, and they've sent us spreadsheets of their own analysis of like, actually this doesn't, that they ran on AirOps, that it doesn't give them the same consistency of outcome for their particular use case. So yeah, I think that this ability to have kind of complete freedom to use the best model for the use case to really validate that is an important thing. We always think of ourselves as kind of Switzerland, and we try and give people the best in class models to choose from. But so often, like, you'll find models have strengths and weaknesses, even if they're slightly older, and sometimes it really takes experimentation to figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like the more, and I think that's going to be an area that I'm excited to continue to see AirOps expand into, is the monitoring and giving you a little bit of like more of that visibility to and the outputs at scale, right? Right now, the ability to just put all this data into, I used Airtable quite a bit. Apparently I like things with air in it, the name, you know, but, and then you can build a lot of things. But what I'm finding more and more is that even whether you're using like an Airtable, a database, or you're using Google Sheets, the more you can handle in AirOps, the more you can handle within your flow, these other applications, you end up depending so much on the Zapiers of the world make and things like that. And those things are so fragile. So the less layers you have stitching it all together, the better. Because when things break, they usually break because of how many incremental things you're using to do something, you know?
Yep. I think what's really interesting is that obviously kind of as LLMs become cheaper and faster, the entire kind of buying process is going to become more personalized, and the funnel's going to change dramatically. The kind of quality of the sales conversation is going to go up. I'm curious if you have any sort of predictions or thoughts on how kind of B2B marketing is going to evolve this year, and things that you think are going to get dramatically better as a B2B SaaS company ourselves.
You know, I'm kind of a realist sometimes, and I do think there's things that get better, but I also will warn that marketers tend to ruin a lot of things. I'm a marketer, so
things you can say that I can't.
Self-critical, like we ruin a lot of things, you know. But I think there's going to be two sides. One side is like the marketers, regardless of your level, regardless of your experience, they're just willing to kind of hack away. And I've been telling my teams for forever, I don't care what your background is, you can't get away with, oh, I'm not technical, or oh, like I'm not good at this. I think marketers do that quite a bit. Oh, I'm not good at writing. It's like, it's a muscle. Go exercise it. You can't be anyone in business and just not know how to write. I'm sorry. You just got to be good at writing. Right? I force all my teams almost to like write long documents. All our meetings are async. Like you write things, you comment on things, and that over time starts to get in this muscle, right? Like, and the reason I say this is it's easy, not just for marketers, for a lot of people to take the shortcuts, right? I'm just going to write a quick Slack and not think about it and write this very long, unthoughtful thing, and, you know. And so what I'm hoping is that like marketers start to realize that the inputs matter so much, which means like they still need to have organized thoughts. And they still need to write things down. And hopefully what that means is that the marketers that are willing to put the work will start to organize their thoughts better and start to think through that, which means then they'll have more clarity for their customers, for their prospects, for the people they're trying to reach. You know, it's kind of the old saying of like, sorry, I wrote you this really long thing. I didn't have time to write something shorter. It's kind of that same concept. And I think that's relevant for AI, because if marketers start to put more effort into the input, the outputs will actually be shorter and more to the point, but they will be more packed with the right essence and the right value, and they will get things across better. So I tend to be a student. I visit so many websites. I screenshot a bunch of stuff. It's always been my hack, because I'm always, wow, how did they distill this essence? You're like, you know, when you read that one sentence and you're like, wow, this captures like so much in so little. And I think the more marketers start to study that, because they're trying to teach a model how to output something well, hopefully that means they start to learn and internalize things as well. And that's where I think an area that hopefully marketing will get better is saying less things, you know, not more.
Yeah, it's amazing how working with language models is a real litmus test of your writing abilities and clarity of expression and word choice. I think when you try to, you're really trying to get those outputs that either have the right tone of voice, or they're structured in the right way, or they incorporate the nuance of your business's position. It forces you to be incredibly precise with your language in a way I think we can get away with not being a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So we've had instances where people that have no technical skills whatsoever, but really good command of kind of written language, are able to outprompt, seasoned engineering team members. It's just a very different skill set. That kind of deep domain expertise, the ability to be organized with your testing and understand different flavors and variations of prompt, and then really precise use of language are really important to getting the outputs you want from language models. And obviously they're getting better over time, so you can get away in some areas with doing less, but in other areas, because they're so much more powerful, the precision and structure and chain of thought that you take the model through is just incredibly important.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you agree with this, but I feel like being able to prompt and working with language models is going to become a skill that everybody should really be trying to develop and hone, whether it's for their individual workflows or for higher scale, more precise kind of marketing use cases as well.
I agree, and let me give you an example of something I did that I think you can scale that much better with something like AirOps as well, but I think this is what I'm hoping marketers and more people will do. So Deepgram, we have a research team, and this is not just technical, it gets into like very complex, complicated things that most people that are not researchers with PhDs or have not been training models for years would understand. And one thing I've always enjoyed, I've worked for a lot of very technical companies that are very technical products like HashiCorp. And one thing I always like, can you just dumb it down for me? We used to do these videos at HashiCorp with the founders where they would do like these whiteboarding sessions. And I remember recording them, and like first time around, I probably understood like 5% of it. And then by the time I'm done editing the video, I'm like, okay, I think I'm like at 30%. And then a year later, you start to familiarize yourself. And I think AI can kind of help accelerate. So one of the things I did this 1 hour interview with our VP of research, where I was just like, I'm not going to publish this stuff, but just help me understand, how do we train our models? What do we do? And then he's talked about like transformer architectures and what we've done with it, and then decomposing the problem and a lot of the different steps where a lot of research in the input versus the output, the encoding, decoding, and things like that. And he went through a bunch of those steps, right? And it was like this hour-long thing. So then what I did is I took because I wanted to just figure out, okay, what can I do with the input? I want to learn every step and do every step even manually. Because if later on I wanted to replicate this, I need to understand where the value is. And one thing I found was critical. I took the entire transcript, and then I started just like deleting stuff that wasn't relevant, right? I started with that.
Yep.
Then I went paragraph by paragraph, and I had Notion AI just rewrite that paragraph into good written sentences, because we talk in very poor sentences, right? And then I rearranged, because like topics jump around, into clusters of topics. And then I started like shoving each cluster into different LLM prompts to try to understand. And then it was kind of this back and forth. And then eventually it started clicking for me. It's like, oh, okay. Because the LLM would actually bring context that it understood already from some of those topics. It knew what a transformer was, for example. Then what ended up coming out of that was almost like a blog announcement that we did for our Nova model that we did, which was like only a few paragraphs. But internally, it gave a lot of people a deeper understanding of why our research does these really special, unique things that allows us to train these models that way faster, more efficient, and more accurate than the competition. And so that's an example of like you going through this process and you're like just processing it, that I think it's really, but hopefully like that's helpful, because it illustrates how decomposing the problem versus just taking an unprocessed transcript and shoving it somewhere and okay, this sucks, this is not that helpful. It's like if you can do a little bit more, even personally for your own learning, you internalize that so much more, and I learned so much. It was like a 5-hour exercise total, but it was like I learned more than a whole year of a back and forth.
Yeah, I think that's so often the path to the truly valuable outcome takes the decomposition, experimentation, and we have a lot of ed tech clients who have all this long form content, and they're trying to figure out how to make it more digestible and more easier for people to consume. And so creating these workflows that effectively go through that breakdown and then recomposition, whilst also maintaining certain sort of guardrails around that final output structure, has been really valuable, because I think the way people learn is very individual and is also changing. And so using LLMs to kind of refactor things and repurpose them is incredibly powerful. And I think there's so many use cases in education, but I'm really excited at the potential for everyone to be taught in the style and sort of format that really works for them in the future, and understand concepts at the most basic level before they then dig in and build up, with the characters that inspire them in the format that they really like. Especially for kids, education just can be completely transformed with LLMs all the way up to us, trying to understand what some of the harder technical things we're grappling with as businesses. So
yeah,
I love that. Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm really excited, kind of somewhat related to that, is we have an 8-month-old baby, and when you're a new parent, you kind of have to be really efficient with your time at work, because like you're trading off something that's extremely valuable, which is spending time that you will never get back, right? Like so it's like you can't be wasteful with things. And I think last year that was like part of my mission was, how do I make the most out of my time, and how do I make the time that I'm spending be very intentional and things like that. And I think that's a huge pocket of, I know there's a lot of AI productivity things, but I still think many of those, because they're like try to do something that works for everyone, they don't really work very well. I found this with, won't name the tool here, but like a meeting transcription and whatnot. I didn't have as much control on the outputs, and the outputs weren't just that helpful, because I'm not going to review this. And the action items were not accurate, so they weren't really helping. But one of the areas that I'm really excited to continue to figure out this year is, how do I have AI flows help highlight the information that really matters, that I need to respond to, or that I need to interact with? How do I get things to be compacted down to the right essence? How do we enable everyone in the team to use the tools to kind of make up for some of their maybe, writing skills and things like that, where they feel more comfortable, and so the inputs that you're getting from all your teams are higher quality? And then like, how do you reduce the number of meetings you're having, or you make those meetings more productive? This is where custom flows right now will, maybe as LLMs evolve, like eventually there's like models that are just like so powerful. I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. And so I think having those very customized things are going to be super, super helpful, whether it's at a product marketing, like using a lot of AirOps flows to kind of help speed up and understand customer interviews better, whether it's like daily on Slack, a daily brief. Like there's so many different areas that I think I'm really excited of, where hopefully you can save productivity, something you're spending 20, 30 hours a week. If you're spending 5 or 10, now you can repurpose some of that gained productivity into improving your inputs and testing new things, coming up with different ideas. And I think that's where the value, I think, is going to be created, is like, how do you reduce the wasted productivity, but then repurpose that time into something that will actually be new or productive,
Absolutely. And I think both, whether it's a personal use case or a scaled marketing use case or a sales use case, the more specificity and the more precision in the workflow, the better. And so often, the sort of generic outputs that you get from a call transcription app just don't cut it. We have a few customers that have really specific internal sales call analysis, sort of follow-up docs that they want to write, where they have their own rubric and they want to assess the call based on that. And kind of with AirOps, they've been able to connect, I think it was Chorus, and then pull in the transcript, and then go ahead and really kind of create something that's very specific to how they want to work, which is a core part of their IP, their kind of operating model as a business. They've developed that over a long period of time, and so they want to be able to have AI leverage that and kind of continue to do that. So we're starting to see those use cases. They're super exciting, and it's on all of us to carve out a little bit of time each week to just pick off the things we're doing that we can hand off to these kind of evergreen workflows and just get more time back. You have the forcing function of being a new dad, so you have even less time, but I think it's going to be really interesting over the next year or so to see work become more about partnering and pairing with AI and handing things off, and just becoming increasingly higher leverage, which will be great for all of us. I think there's always more to do. So
I agree. This year should be really interesting. I'm excited about some of the trends we're already seeing, and I think like a little bit promotional and self-serving here, but I do think that people will start to realize more and more that communicating via voice is actually a lot easier and less time consuming, because that's what we do every day. But when it gets to a work environment, like we've just been conditioned to type everything, and typing is never going to go away. Writing, and it's still a very useful exercise because it forces us to structure our thinking. But a lot of us, you've used like the Looms of the world, or like voice notes in Slack or WhatsApp or whatever. WhatsApp, I think the last stats they released, there's something like 7 billion voice notes a day on WhatsApp, and this was like last year. So when you start to think about that and the potential for that, but then also the amount of additional data that it would generate. I'm really excited about that trend because I've started to use it quite a bit with my teams where, I'll give you an example, we have an agency we use for web development and design, and we have internal teams, we have contractors, freelancers, and so we were in all these meetings reviewing things, design and whatnot. I was like, just do a Loom or something similar to Loom, and share that and share notes. Like, no more meetings to review anything. And then the meetings are like, everything's already been commented, everything's been designed, as if something requires a little bit additional discussion, right? And I think the more people start to realize that, and I think Deepgram is going to play an awesome part in enabling these applications to be built and enabling these interactions to be as productive as possible, right? There's this whole side of things where we just gotten used to emails and things like that, but imagine if you can send somebody just a voice note, and then on their own time, when they're the most productive or their attention is the best, they respond, and they respond in a very personal way as well. You can have these async communications that have a lot of the qualities of synchronous communication real time. I think that will be really, really exciting, that becoming the norm. You know, it's like when I was at IBM, we used Lotus Notes. I don't know if you remember that, but and I remember I didn't meet my first manager for 2 years in person. And every meeting, it was only voice, and there was this like tiny little thumbnail that was like this big, super pixelated. And I had no idea what this person was like. You know, she ended up being a lot taller than I had picture in my mind. And then we went into these like meetings where there's video and things like that. And so I feel like this next step is going to be, everyone is worn out from meetings. They want in person. In person is not always as practical anymore. And so what's the next iteration? And hopefully it will be voice, and it will be a huge, huge part of that.
We have a couple customers who have this saying that we've adopted, which is Loom or it didn't happen, when you're shipping a feature, and
I like that.
becomes and then the Loom becomes the docs, and it's just become part of the workflow to save a meeting. My personal favorite voice use case is just at the end of the day, just going for a walk and dictating what's in my head and just asking
awesome.
ChatGPT to organize it, and then I pick it up in the morning because I can go to bed without having to have it all flying around. But I think what's interesting about the voice as a platform is that, you know, progress will be non-linear, right? Because, you know, as soon as the costs reach a certain point and the speed improves past a certain point, suddenly like a completely different interaction paradigm becomes possible. And I can just imagine, you know, this year at some point starting to move away from text-based chat interaction with LLMs and moving to voice far more. We're already seeing clients ask for that in the education sphere, but I can see it becoming pretty ubiquitous by end of year. So you guys are set up to capture some really interesting moments in this AI platform shift.
The future I want to happen faster is like I'm in my car or in a walk, and I can just listen to a stream of things that are, you know, I love audiobooks too, but sometimes you need to catch up at work, and I don't want to be walking doing this, right? So if I can listen to a lot of these things and catch up, like, hey, these are the latest messages, these are the latest summary of meetings, this is what happened, here's a summary of the latest Confluence or Notion notes that got updated, here's like, you know, all these things, and if you can listen to it, you kind of, you know, that would be a huge, huge gain as well. So
awesome. Well, Marcel, look, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being an awesome pioneer on AirOps, and obviously Deepgram's one of our favorite partners to work with. We're always amazed by what our customers put together with your models, and really excited to see what's to come. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
yeah, my pleasure. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.